Welcome once again to the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. When we were first getting our feet wet learning about the business of sports betting and gaming way back in February 2021, our guest today was immersed in her role as Director of Content for Bally's Interactive then. In June 2022, a couple of months after the opening of Ontario's open and regulated gambling market, Jessica Welman joined SBC Americas, initially as an editor and then promoted a little more than a year ago to managing editor in recognition of her reporting and analysis of the gaming industry. Her insight and wit also made her a must-follow on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, and also as a frequent guest on the Gaming News Canada show. We were taken aback a little bit in February when Welman announced her time at SBC was ending, but figured there was at least another chapter for her in the industry. And indeed, that's the case, as Welman let it be known last month that she is joining responsible gaming advocate Brianne Doura-Schawohl to support the push for more robust responsible gaming and problem gambling policy across regulated gaming. And one of our favorite people in the industry joins us here again on the podcast. Welcome, Jess.
Hello. I was very excited that even though I'm out of media, you still want to talk to me, Steve.
Well, absolutely. And again, as I mentioned off the top, Jess, you were very influential and a huge help to me. And if I remember correctly, I think we first met at the SBC Summit Americas in December 2021, I think the first time. And as I said, you're one of the most, someone that I followed, someone I've learned a lot from, and again, always enjoyed the time we've been able to spend together at various conferences over the past 5 years. And I appreciate you coming back on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure if I've been in this new role long enough to have too different of a take on things, but I will tell you it's been an insane 2 months, starting in a lobbying and advocacy role in February is truly just the baby being thrown, not even in the deep end of the pool, like the deep end of the ocean. So it's been fun though.
I think something, again, we may both be a little biased here, Jess, but I think, having a career or a background in journalism, it does prepare you to do a lot of different, take on a lot of different tasks. And, I think when you look at both your LinkedIn page and my LinkedIn page, we both have, whether we liked it or not, have had to reinvent ourselves a little bit professionally over our lives. But I think luckily our backgrounds in journalism, that has given us the ability to do that time and again.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was telling Brianne, so in high school, I was a big speech and debate nerd. Like, did it competitively. I did many different clubs and stuff, but that was the thing I was most excited about. And I remember the Western Kentucky University recruited me to be on their speech team. And my mom was like, there's no film program. You'd have to just be a general comms major. I don't really think this makes sense. It's not like you can go pro in speech. But as I look at my life now, especially, but in the media side of it too, just learning to, under a very short period of time, craft the best argument you possibly can and communicate it to someone is the skill set that far and away more than the degrees and the other things has served me best in my career.
And I think having that curiosity that you need to have as a journalist, that just makes you smarter and more well-versed when you are speaking publicly, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's especially B2B journalism, right? If you are not interested in the vertical that you're doing, I just don't even know, it would be the most miserable job if it wasn't interesting to you, right? So as the managing editor of SBC Media, in that year plus that I was doing that, we had to hire a lot of people and I was doing a lot of job interviews. And I would always be like, do you like gambling? As one of the interview questions. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't need to know how much you gamble. I don't need to know. But one, are you just notionally averse to it in any sort of way? And two, like, do you find it interesting? Because if you don't, you are going to hate this. Like, if you stuck me in, I was never a science kid. Like, if I was like a biology B2B reporter, I would be so miserable. It has to be something that you can like, and gaming's one of those, as we know, there's always somebody like finding a new loophole, doing a new thing, and it's just a never ending well of new things to figure out.
You know, it's funny. We're recording this podcast on Monday, March 30th. And I was speaking to Max Meltzer, the CEO of Stride Gaming this morning, you know, trying to get Max teed up to do a podcast sometime the next month or so. And the one thing I did say is I'm a very casual gambler, but I've been covering this industry for a little over 5 years now. And you really do meet some fascinating, smart people in this industry, and I think that's why the podcast has really become a labor of love for me, because whether, you know, as people with a legal background that come from the banking industry, or even journalists, you know, like yourself and Jeff Sakodny and Dustin Gauker and Steve Ruddick and, you know, Scott Longley across the ponds, and the various journalists that we've had join us on the podcast over the 5 years, that people in this industry have really terrific stories, and this industry, and as much criticism as it faces, it is a very dynamic industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's why way back in the day, poker was so compelling to me. It's changed a bit now. But like back in I wasn't quite the moneymaker heyday, but I was in the residual effect of that.
Right.
Just the range of fascinating people at a poker table that are just at like Jennifer Tilly, Oscar-nominated actress Jennifer Tilly, sitting next to like one of the biggest tomato farmers in California, sitting next to somebody who like is some sort of, you know, .com zillionaire, next to somebody that's like, I used to be a street magician. It was just more than anything I'd been in was this melting pot ridiculousness of that you never encounter that elsewhere. And as someone, you know, from a fairly hegemonic town of Lexington, Kentucky, it was just very cool.
And it's funny, like I'll still to this day, you know, if I'm sitting on a Friday afternoon with nothing going on, I'll go find some old Daniel Negreanu videos on YouTube. It's just, you know, just a fascinating character, and such, you know, the way he plays poker is so entertaining and so smart. And to me, that's watching Daniel in action is no different than watching a big home run in a baseball game, or a goal being scored in double overtime of a Stanley Cup playoff game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I want to ask Justin, you know, tell me as much as you want, but I would like to know about the decision to leave SBC, and then also, you know, the backstory behind the decision to join Brianne and get involved kind of in a, you know, a much different sector of the gambling industry.
Sure. So, this is a very like chicken and egg kind of situation. I'm not quite first. I don't know that I was actively just like, I need to do something else, but as you know, in the media, there's kind of only as high as you can go. And short of, you know, Andy McCarron above me at SBC Media is the one position that was left. The managing editor role of helping and overseeing all of the editorial sites at SBC and the content they were doing. I like that. There are some journalists, I think you're more this than me, that like, and Andy's this way. They miss the writing. They miss the day-to-day. The writing part, I'm fine. Don't make me write. That's great. I'll go manage. That's fun. But there is just kind of that voice in your head that's just like, okay, but now what? And I am a person that I'm not going to just sit in a role for 10 years. and be like, this is fun. It has to feel like something different is happening and something more is coming along. So I think there was still, I'd only been doing that role for a year. There was still room, but Brianne called me with this opportunity, and it was just like, oh, if I could hand pick what I go and do next, it would essentially be this. And to pass up on it was just not really an option. Both because, for those who are unfamiliar, Brianne is just one of the foremost authorities on, problem gambling legislation, what makes good policy. I believe the first time I met her, we had interacted on Twitter several times. I feel like many people have this experience with someone, right? You interact with them on Twitter a bunch. And we were at the first day of SBC Americas, or North America, when it was still in New York. And we kind of like saw each other from across the room, and basically at the same time went up to each other to be like, I have such a huge girl crush on you. Where our friendship was always just rooted in extreme mutual respect for the work each other did. So that's why, like, so they say don't necessarily work with friends, don't mess up friendships. I didn't have that concern, because the reason we're friends is because the way we work just jives with one another, And then I put it out a few weeks ago. I don't remember exactly how long, but I will say I did have starting. I don't know the right word for it. Is misgivings is probably a little strong, but there are things about the industry that I think all of us have things in any industry you work with that you're going to get a little bit frustrated by. And I continued to find myself being like, okay, I don't love that. Don't love that. And in the B2B space, especially because we host events too, SBC is very much a group that's like, we believe in the regulated market. We believe in these companies. And sometimes it was just getting a little tiring to be this relentless cheerleader when some of the things that were happening in the regulated market, I just really wasn't okay with anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's something you've been very crystal clear on, especially on Twitter, is that they're, regulated gaming, I think we can all both agree, is better than non-regulated gaming.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean that there aren't problems and that there are some solutions needed, and responsible gaming is one place. I do want to talk a little bit later about communication and dealing with mainstream media, but I think that's the one thing about you. You've been pretty consistent over the time we've known each other that the industry could be a lot better when it comes to responsible gaming policies and problem gambling. Can you just talk, Jess, like what exactly will your role be with Brianne? What the kind of work that you'll be doing?
We kind of left it open-ended of let's just kind of see where this goes. I will say we came in with this idea that I would be head of communications for the campaign for fairer gambling. And we joke now that I've already been kind of promoted to deputy director, because what started as, it would be great to do outreach with media and get, op-eds and that sort of thing, with just the pace of the legislative season, very quickly turned into, okay, can you get on a plane to Maryland to testify, because we've got multiple places the campaign needs to be. I will be on a plane to testify just a few hours after I get done with you. And I didn't know that was going to be the case 2 hours before this podcast was recorded. So right now, I think at least this legislative season, it's a bit like whack-a-mole, where there's just so much happening. And it caught everybody a little bit off guard, I think. Generally, you don't see a lot of gambling legislation in an election year. It's one of those topics you see politicians kind of say, let's wait. But what's heartening about it is most of the bills that we're going and speaking to are reform bills, which I bucks that trend a little bit because you're not necessarily expanding it, you're trying to improve it, and maybe that's why there's more of an appetite. But and through the end of the legislative season, I think we're just I'm doing my best to learn from her and tag team along the way and figure out just which bills can we go give our support to, which, do we think our participation can help get it across the finish line, or in the case of, certain expansion ideas, which bills can we make sure don't get across the finish line? There's a little bit of that too. So that has been kind of where we are day to day. And I always joke that I get up and I do about 2 hours of work with an idea of what my day is going to be before the phone inevitably rings. And it's like, surprise, you're working on this today instead. So it's an interesting balance. I mean, and in that way, it's very much like being a reporter, right? You have that last story from the previous day that you're going to kick off with. But as I'm sure everyone is scrambling this morning, because I believe the NFL has written to Kalshi asking, can you not, with the attendance bets and mention markets and stuff, you have to drop what you're doing sometimes because something more pertinent comes up.
Yeah, I think that's part of the adrenaline rush of being a journalist and with what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Is that,
so I still get that piece of it, which is, to me, I love that. If I had a job where I know what it's going to be every single day, I would probably go a little bonkers.
Yeah, you and I will never be working with making widgets in a factory, Jess.
Exactly.
That's a slam dunk. For our listeners, and I think here in Canada, if you're following this industry, you're quite aware right now of the upheaval that's been caused by prediction markets within the industry, and I just wonder, however, we might not be quite so aware. Like, is there a politicization of what's going on in this industry, and is it we know, for example, that I think it's Donald Trump Jr. who sits on the board or is an advisor for both Kalshi and Paula Market. And is this yet another case where you have Republicans on one side of this issue and you have Democrats on the other, or is it not quite so black and white?
I don't think it's that clear, to be honest. But keep in mind, gambling sentiments in general, it can vary a lot who carries certain bills. Like in my home state of Kentucky, generally it's Republicans that carry gambling expansion bills. In Virginia, it's generally Democrats that carry gambling expansion bills. And it really does kind of vary state to state, because it's an issue where you can take a lot of different positions on it, and it's not so black and white. I think the prediction markets, though, it's a bit different in that I saw a tweet from Joe Brennan, I believe, who was like, it'll be interesting to see with all these lobbyists who's going to come in and kind of clean up and give the clear info about prediction markets. And I kind of said, what's unclear? You either like the idea that there's this opportunity to do this on everything, or you don't. This is kind of at the federal level how this is shaking out, and why I do think you are seeing both sides of the aisle. I've seen you've got that bipartisan legislation from Schiff, and I'm sorry, because I'm not the reporter anymore, I don't have to know all 11 prediction federal bills off the top of my head, which is fun. But a lot of them are bipartisan pieces of legislation. I do think until the midterms, it's going to be hard to get momentum on that, because who wants to challenge Donald Trump on prediction markets? But I think if you have even just the parties don't necessarily switch, but you get narrower margins after the midterms, there are plenty of Republicans, Utah being a state that comes to mind, and whatnot, that are like generally, I will say, generally the party that is for religious reasons, anti-gambling tend to be Republicans. There might be enough of them that you can get something done. But this is one of those issues that when you look at the range of people commenting on it, it's covering the gamut. And so, if you can get somebody who is a very conservative member of the GOP and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to both agree that something is bad in 2026, it has to have a certain amount of legs to it.
Yep. It's funny. I mean, literally a year ago, if you went to a gaming conference in your country, there would usually be a rather robust conversation on why isn't regulated iGaming expanding to more states. I think it's still like 6 or 7 states that have legal online gaming, and it's almost like that's become an afterthought. Given it's almost like I guess it's the gambling industry's edition of the gold rush of FanDuel and DraftKings have prediction market platforms now. I think Fanatics, if I'm correct,
they do, yes.
Fanatics has one. Other operators have indicated they want to go down that road. I think BetMGM, Adam Greenblatt, he said that BetMGM is not gonna follow everyone else for now. But regulating iGaming seems it's taken a back seat to everything going on around prediction markets.
Well, I think some of this is just the election year. We did in Virginia, you saw there was a very elaborate, lengthy debate around online casino expansion that ended up failing. But I think that's more the traditional, you don't want to expand gambling. And that one, if you take a look at what happened in Virginia, it was very interesting where in both chambers, the original vote was no. And then it was called for reconsideration, and things changed after some conversations were had, I'm guessing. But the rest of them, I think it's just a bad a bad year to try to push something like that through. But I do think you're right, though, that every state legislature, you only have so much capital to expend on gaming each year. In Kentucky, I remember one year that sports betting failed. It was kind of like, listen, we needed to get this historical horse racing bill through, so it's just not happening. Where it is, you have these shorter sessions, you have limited numbers of days to get things done, and I think a lot of states are doing prediction market bills. We'll see. None of them have gotten to a governor yet. I mean, I'm sure there will be a prediction market of how many minutes before Kalshi files that lawsuit. I don't think it'll be a matter of days or hours even. I think it'll be like that day. But I think it's just a tough year to try to get iGaming through in all of the states that tend to have it, have more robust conversations around them are short sessions and have actually already. I'm trying to think who still has active iGaming legislation. I'm drawing a blank. I think New York, but that's always a tough one.
Right. Is your iGaming platform ready for Alberta? Bede Gaming is ready to support your new market entry with a SOC 2 compliant platform, multi-tenant infrastructure model, and unlimited configurability. Future-proof your iGaming performance today with a solid foundation for your next province. Bede Gaming is your partner for success. Get in touch at bedegaming.com. From a responsible gaming standpoint, I just wonder, how do you push policies now, or how do you deal with what feels like a backlash for now you have yet another gambling product? So now there are even more concerns, and I think there has been this rush, kind of like what we saw in Ontario just back in 2022, when all of a sudden sports betting and iGaming ads were flooding the airwaves in Canada, and there was a backlash to the point where the AGCO almost, I guess, a year and a half after the market opened, had to change its advertising standards and rule that current athletes could no longer appear in sports betting advertising unless it was to promote responsible gambling. And you see where the NHL, they rushed and got into bed with prediction markets right on the sponsorship deal. I think a week before you and I are taping this podcast, Major League Baseball announced a partnership with Polymarket. So there's a race for these leagues and sports bodies to kind of exploit a new revenue opportunity. You now have prediction markets, another form of gambling, and you have, as I mentioned earlier, you have traditional sports betting and iGaming operators who now offer prediction markets. And is that potentially dangerous? Probably is overstating it, but is there cause for concern with what you're seeing in the U.S. right now?
Yes, I think so. I think we'll talk about a study later that suggests that increased legalized gambling doesn't have correlation with problem gambling rates. I believe a study out of Ontario very clearly showed that the prevalence rates rose, one, with the institution of OLG, and then they rose again 4 years ago with this. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean you shouldn't have gambling. Our organization isn't anti-gambling, but it's naive to suggest that gambling expansion does not have consequences, be it regulated or unregulated. And so the question is, how do you address these consequences? And I think for me personally, I am not comfortable with the breadth of prediction markets. I don't think, things that can easily be manipulated should be something that we have contracts on. But just like, and this is just a personal opinion. I'm not saying this should be policy. My personal opinion is I find it just kind of icky, the idea of making it so that, we can gamble on how long this podcast is going to be or how many times I'm going to say something. I just don't personally think that's a direction I want society to be going in. But just policy-wise, you look at the protections in place. People can do this when they're under 18. There are no limits to how often they can do it. The notion of a prediction market, which I guess is, for some bettors, the benefit of it is that it exists a long time and you can flip and continually participate on it. But that consistent engagement without somebody monitoring how much you're engaging, the fact that we've got margin trading coming, which is essentially doing this on credit, and just all of those things added up, it's so frustrating how much they're we have so many safeguards in place. I believe Kalshi last week, it was both same, God forbid Kalshi and Polymarket do anything without the other one saying, oh, we're doing that too, on the exact same day. But they both were like, hey, we've heard your warnings and concerns, and now we're going to try to preemptively stop people from participating in markets where they know the answer, And I was reading the one, I don't remember which press release was we already monitor, patrol, and block. And I was just it's almost as if the words monitor, patrol, and block have no meaning. Because if you why haven't you been doing this already? You're just passively yeah, we noticed. We know that you work here. Seems fishy. So I don't know if that answers your question or I just went on a big rant. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm really trying to be kind of play it down the middle with prediction markets because there's obviously an appetite for them. I think I saw this morning that Kalshi did $800 million around sports events last week. Obviously,
March Madness
being hugely influential, but it also does seem like there haven't been enough guardrails put in place, and again, these companies saw an opportunity to seize a moment and make a ton of money. And it kind of feels like the sports leagues have taken the same path. And I even wonder if, again, like the DraftKings and FanDuels and Fanatics is kind of a keeping up with the Joneses mentality, and that we're going to you and I might sit here and have this conversation again from a year from now, and the conversation is going to be very, very different. So, I just think it is a bit worrisome, but maybe I'm over exaggerating that.
Well, and I've made this point to people when I've had some personal conversations about kind of the shift in my job is the regulated market is only as good as its worst actor.
Right.
And so that's the thing is there are plenty of people like I think FanDuel has some great RG tools and that the way they promote my spend and the way they're very committed to that Trusted Voices campaign is fantastic. But they are one of, I feel like 24 might even be generous, 24 online sports betting brands. And until you make that baseline, somebody's always going to be willing to only do the absolute minimum. And you're only going to be as good as the person or entity that's doing the absolute minimum, trying to skirt around loopholes, trying to skirt around edges. And so with prediction markets, with the floor already being so low, it's just like it's just, they can announce these things and whatever, but they also do so being like, and just so you know, we don't have to do this. That's kind of the problem, right. I think.
It's interesting. There was a report that came out from Blask, a fairly new analytics company that came out last week looking at both the U.S. and Canadian markets. And, I think what probably stood out the most was how prevalent offshore gambling still is. And, at a time where, you basically, as you said earlier, you can bet on almost anything. You can bet on, whether or not we put cream and sugar in our coffee this morning. Like what does that tell you about, I guess, not just in the industry, but where gambling fits into people's lives now? And as someone who, you're a poker player, you've been involved in the gaming industry for a long time, you've worn a few different hats in the industry. Is it a red flag for you, or does it as a catalyst for some conversations, and maybe it's a catalyst why you're doing what you're doing now with Brianne, because you do believe that there have to be more guardrails put in place given what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I think, as I noted on Twitter numerous times, no argument sends me into a blind rage faster than we cannot be asked to do other than the absolute bare regulatory minimum, or else millions of people are going to start playing on the black market. Like, I personally have not seen, read, been made aware of any sort of evidence that suggests this large group of people that generally say, I don't want to break the law, suddenly decides, oh, well, I'm not allowed to bet on NCAA lacrosse props anymore, so now I'm going to break the law. Like, I just haven't seen that information. Maybe it exists. I don't think the answer to the black market is regulation. You may bring some people in. I did run a poll on Twitter, which is going to be mostly like poker players and sports bettors, and saw that about 30% of them said, once it became legal, I stopped playing on these black market sites. But like, generally, you're just introducing gambling to a whole new group of people that wouldn't do it otherwise. And like, when you continue to unpack this black market argument, I almost think it's more concerning to suggest that you've gotten someone if somebody who previously had no interest in doing this is suddenly so dependent on it that they need to break the law in order to participate in it. I'm certainly not a clinician. You can't make statements, but like, that's a troubling sentiment to me.
Yeah, and I think the fact that people feel that their gambling is part of people's lives to the point where they gamble in a place where I think in a lot of cases they don't know what's regulated and what's not regulated.
That's a huge problem.
They just want to play an online slot game and or play baccarat or poker or whatever, and they don't know the difference between brand A that's not regulated and brand B that is regulated.
Well, and we've seen this issue many places. I remember showing it in Hard Rock Cincinnati, the poker manager. There are black market operators who just straight up pretend to be casinos in states and just say, "Hey, Ohio, Hard Rock Casino's online right now," and those operators are really the worst actors of all. They're willfully misrepresenting themselves. They're fully offshore. They're fully black market. Their goal is to trick and con people. But keep in mind, all of these reports, I say this with my journalist hat on, you're lumping sweeps. And I guess, it's entirely possible they're lumping predictions. They're lumping a lot of things that, yes, I think they have issues because they don't have the same mandatory guardrails. But there are people who are making good faith attempts to run what they believe is legal business with a legal argument behind it. And the guy pretending to be Hard Rock Cincinnati, those are different categories in my mind. So some of these numbers that we hear about the black market, I think the Blask report to me is one of the best ones I've seen in terms of here is data we aggregated to really assess the permeation of this. But plenty of these that you see around March Madness are I really feel is just a person sitting in a room that just picked a number out of the air. Because it is difficult to assess. But also they lump everything in. Illegal activity would also be, if you did a $20 bracket with your friends for March Madness, and that gets lumped in it too. And it's just we're talking a huge spectrum of difference here that cannot all be categorized as one.
Hey, that's a pretty good segue. Just a couple more questions, Jess, and that's a group called the Gaming Public Policy Consulting put out a study into mainstream media coverage of the industry. I think 2 weeks ago, we flagged it in last week's the newsletter 2 weeks ago. Jeff Edelstein had an interesting piece about his reaction to the study and. InGame.com. He actually spoke with the person, one of the leaders from the consulting group. I think you had a post on X about it, and I guess short strokes. The study kind of points to a bias by mainstream media towards its gambling coverage. But if I remember correctly, your X post again kind of I think indicated that this wasn't a black and white issue, and I think you, as the old expression goes, you raised a Spockian eyebrow about this study.
Yeah, the signature Welman snark came out on this
exactly.
So pet peeve when I was a reporter editor, I don't let anybody on my team write anything unless they've read the research. I don't know in this instance how much of the research was read. If you look at this study that looked at conceptually, the idea was let's take a variety of vice industries, cannabis, smoking, et cetera, over a set period of time. Let's pull articles to all of these vices and then look at the language usage across all of them. Conceptually, not the worst idea. In action, this entire study looked at 1 year of, it was something like 13 different vices and evaluated a grand total of 73 articles. Right. So you're talking about, I don't know how many were in each category, but we got to guess that gambling has, I don't know, I think 7 would be a generous number of the 73. I know, there were way more than 7 stories written by mainstream media about gambling from 2024 to 2025. But, you have a sample size problem here. And then the assessment tool was running it through Claude.
Right.
You know, so I don't know. Maybe there is a bias, but in this particular instance, the sample size that you've used is ridiculously small, and I just have issue with like just your methodology. But also, people write about smoking, for example, a lot differently in 2026 than they did in 1996. And I think, you know, I was barely a teenager back then, but you know, I remember in the early 90s, the rhetoric around smoking was very much like the rhetoric you see around gaming now, because you were having these lawsuits, you were seeing the research, and you finally had information that you didn't have previously. You don't hear vilifying headlines about smoking anymore because you're not going to get clicks to be like, would you believe smoking kills you? You know, like that you're not going to, nobody wants to read that story. What we're seeing now is we're about 8 years into sports betting at this point. You know, we're still in the first decade of online gambling, really, and now you're starting to see some research. So of course the rhetoric is going to be different around it, because like, I know cocaine kills people, I know smoking has the negative effects it has. We're not, you know, we're still learning exactly what the impact of not just really online gambling, but just this online lifestyle. I think the meta ruling from last week on addiction in social media apps, all of this is a brave new world territory. So of course you're going to have a different tone to it than issues that are settled.
Yeah, and I think even, you know, there's been so much coverage around the harassment of athletes by you know, lack of a better term, losers on social media. You almost always anonymous who are going after athletes, and I do think at some point, like the meta case, there will be more teeth put into in Canada, into the criminal code and legislation in the U.S. where those actors will serve jail time, or there would be stiffer punishments for threatening people. But you're right, Jess. Like this is a fast moving train, and legislators are trying to catch up to what's happened in social media. The one thing I will say about the study is I think it does highlight once again that this industry doesn't do nearly a good enough job talking about themselves and the things that they do a good job of. And to your point earlier, yeah, I mean, we go to these conferences and everybody's patting each other on the back, and you and I both sit and we watch panels, and you know, there's not much pushback on issues like responsible gaming. And here in Canada, and again, I sound like I'm a broken record on this one, but too often Paul Burns from the Canadian Gaming Association is the only voice defending the industry with mainstream media outlets when these stories do pop up. So I think in some part there's been a failure by the industry, from regulators to operators to tell their story.
Yeah, and I think too, though, a lot of times I think the internal conversation is to finger point and say, well, if you think our ads are bad, I mean, I've heard testimony, go look at pharmaceutical ads. They spend even more. If you think our ads are bad, look at how often Chumba is doing this sort of thing. And I'm just like, I didn't give them a license to run a product that people can get addicted to, that can lead to severe financial harms and suicide. I didn't give them that. I gave you that. So why are you not doing more? And I think, again, I mean, the SBA, I believe, says currently they have 3 pillars: to expand the iGaming footprint, to expand the sports betting footprint. And the third pillar actually is we want to combat any future market restrictions on the way things currently are. And to me, that is an extremely problematic stance to have, because perhaps that's not their intent, but the implication sure seems like that you're not even willing to entertain reform bills. And in any venue, I would hope you're open-minded to say, okay, research is out, we need to revisit this. But especially in something like online gambling, which is new, which is seeing more research, I would hope that we all should be agreeing that we should be continually refining and reiterating and changing. And to have the biggest lobbying group just say, our position is we will fight against any changes whatsoever, is to me a little disconcerting.
Yeah, no, that's alarming for you for sure, because as you pointed out twice now, I mean, their research is still new, and again, this is something that I hear often in Ontario, is that there is a need for more research and more data that will spark changes that need to be made. But this, you couldn't be more bang on, Jess, that there do need to be put reforms into place and tweaks need to be made, and we probably are in the next 10 years. We're going to see a lot more research than what we have in our hands right now.
Yeah. Well, and credit cards, that's a great example. We heard last week BetMGM is phasing them out. DraftKings and FanDuel is phasing them out. I sincerely applaud operators for being proactive in that way. But I also think it's going to benefit you more in the long run, because as we've seen in Europe, if you do take this stance of everything's fine just the way it is, and you reach a breaking point, you're probably not going to like what these people have decided is the right answer. And that's why, college props, to me, it's such a no-brainer. It's 1% of your revenue. It's a very small thing. The NCAA research that came out it's either earlier this month or last month, as I'm a Kentucky girl, we're college basketball people. 46% of college basketball players have said, I have been harassed by someone because of a sports bet.
Right.
Like, I just, when a group of young college athletes are all raising their hand, the Big Ten athletes have all signed a big petition that are just like, can you please stop? This makes me scared to leave my house and scared to go to class. And your answer is, well, we can't because everybody's going to go to the black market. Why not just take that PR win? This is me even pre-joining Brianne. I've said this on podcasts as an SBC person all the time. I have no idea why you do not just take the PR win of proactively saying, you're right, college wagers in general are great and something we should monitor, and we understand that there will still be harassment tied to that, but let's just eliminate the pressure of an individual person being targeted by removing this bet category. And then, to your point, go around to all the media and tell people what a good thing you did.
Yeah, I feel the same way about the NBA, and to me, it's real easy to prevent a repeat of the Jonte Porter scandal, where you don't have guys, the 10th and 11th players coming off the bench, having the opportunity to put prop bets on players like that. It makes no sense, and for such a minute piece of revenue to do that.
Yeah. Did you see the PBS? Can you get PBS in Canada? The Breaking the Deadlock.
Yes. Yeah, I think if we either included a link, if it wasn't in last week's newsletter, Jess, I grabbed it, and it'll be in this week in the April 1st newsletter.
Such a good. I'm a debate nerd, but I nerded out hard on that one. That was really good. But Anita Marks was making the point that cheating happened before, and I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that. But to your point, prior to the algorithmic automated creation of hundreds of thousands of millions of submarkets, someone like Jonte Porter is not a meaningful enough player to that basketball team to influence the outcome of the game, the money line, the total.
Yes.
But when you say, I'm going to make a bunch of markets that are about this guy who cannot influence the overall outcome of the game, of course more of it is going to be happening because you have created how many more opportunities. And I think everyone is correct that this supervision of the regulated market is catching it. But like, as you know, because you've written these stories, we're only catching like the guys who are really just not good at hiding it, right? Like there are probably people that are just, quietly couple points here, couple points there, betting 3,000, 4,000 a game, and we're completely unaware of it. But like that, the opportunity exists because all of these markets that didn't exist before existed.
Yeah. And just the last thing on the NCAA too, I think it'd be a PR win to just say, NCAA athletes or student athletes, and eliminating all prop betting on student athletes is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean,
period, full stop.
Again, it's one of those, people are doing this because it feels good. And I'm like, oh, maybe. I agree it's not going to fix everything. You're still going to have athletes that for, games and totals, like I'm sure that poor UConn kid is feeling it today from just the Duke fandom. Maybe even not Duke sports bettors, but just the Duke. But it's less about those guys, and it's more about the walk-on center at Northern Kentucky University and these sorts of people that don't have NIL deals, that don't have financial security and protections and that sort of thing. That one, I think we got to get a bit too focused on game manipulation and forget the harassment piece a little bit more. But, like these kids grew up on the internet. The NCAA data shows us that more than professional athletes, they have a great game. They're really excited. They get on social media because they want to see people excited for them. They're picking up their phone and they're engaging, and then they're seeing this right away. And Timothy Fong's work out of UCLA is really interesting on just the added level of stress that puts on a young person who is a student athlete that did not exist. Because again, we're not talking about just top 25. I was about to say BCS because I'm old like that. Top 25 football teams, the Final Four. We're talking about a lot of different sports where you would not think that kind of stress would be in the life of, a college softball player or baseball player, and it shouldn't be.
Hey, Jess, I just want to finish on, what's going on here in my country, and that's, as I mentioned, I think off the top, Ontario's going to celebrate its four-year anniversary, or recognize its 4-year anniversary over the Easter weekend. Alberta's following Ontario's lead. We're going to have an open and regulated market in Western Canada sometime this year. The Alberta government is hoping by mid-July. We'll see.
No, you finally have a due date. It's amazing.
Yeah. Just your thoughts, putting on your journalist hat once again on 4 years of what you've seen in Ontario. And again, you were very hands-on with the Canadian gaming business website and having people like Tom Nightingale writing and reporting for you, and just your thoughts on that Ontario market. And is there any advice you would give for the people that are creating the Alberta market?
I think you have a really good framework to work off of. Again, this is just me speaking as myself. I'm not speaking for the campaign or anything, but you have managed to do what no one in the United States has managed to do, which is create something robust enough that smaller operators can succeed. I think in Alberta, you certainly have a bit of a population difference, and we will see if that, disparity of market options carries over. But I also think you create a flexible framework the way that Ontario has, that you can go back in, and once you have evidence, you say, okay, we're going to change this, refine this, fine tune this. And I think that's what I've always appreciated about the Ontario market, is that as much as, Paul Burns and the CGA, defend operators, they also will say, hey, we need to do better about this. So I think that you got a good place to start. Let's just, outside of, I would be getting really granular. What is, all of the
FinTrack?
Yeah, FinTrack.
Yes.
That's what it is. Maybe iron out your FinTrack stuff, get your universal self-exclusion list in order so everybody's collecting data in the same way. Like, that's my biggest suggestion. I realize you're taking groups that existed previously and moving them from kind of gray to clearly regulated, and that they do things a certain way. But just say, as a baseline from day one, this is the order the spreadsheet's in. This is the order that you take information in, so that your information sharing across operators and stuff. It's so funny that people, it's such a boring thing to say, but I think just they fully don't realize with these things that launch, creating unity across operators just organizationally requires more thought than you would realize.
Right. Hey, last question. Again, because you're a passionate poker player, just let me get your perspective. You know about the liquidity issue here. The Ontario Superior Court made a ruling last year that allowed for cross-border play. Three provincial lottery and gaming corporations have taken that case to the Supreme Court of Canada now. Just I guess maybe your thoughts as both covering this industry and as a poker player, like how relevant is liquidity, and is it something that's important or adds to the entertainment level for you as an online poker player, or is it a bit of a nothing burger?
Oh, it's absolutely everything. Now, keep in mind, Ontario, relatively large province, you probably got a reasonably healthy player pool, but in the US, even in these states that are a little bit bigger, Pennsylvania, Michigan, liquidity is an issue because I'll use Nevada as an example because I lived there and I played on Nevada apps a lot. I would open up 2 or 3, 10 cent, 25 cent tables at a time. And at all 3 tables, there would be 9 of us. 6 of us would be at all 3. At least. And then maybe there's like 1 to 2 people who are not playing all the same tables. If you do not have liquidity, anybody that comes into that environment that's new, that wants to learn, that wants to be a recreational poker player, gets eaten up very, very quickly, because those of us that are the 6 that are all 3 play all the time. I mean, I was one of the fishier people in the pool, but you're up against people who are playing multiple tables that are very, very talented. And if those are the only people to play against, anybody new that comes in, it's just, their bankroll disappears. They're done right away. And you cannot grow the game. What's nice about live poker, you can have, Phil Ivey can only sit one place. Daniel Negreanu can only be in one seat at a time. With online poker, with multi-tabling, you get the same person in some instances, 20 different places. And if the only people to choose from are largely this group that are, one person is representing 20 seats on a site, it's just, over time, nobody new is going to come in and build a bankroll. And that's why I see way more people who are newer in the United States taking up live poker than online poker, because just solvers, AI, cheating, bots, all of these things make poker difficult. Shooting yourself in the foot by also saying we're going to limit how many people are available to even play on the site at a given time is a fixable mistake, where I hope you see Alberta and Ontario share. I don't believe that the US laws are written in a way that you would, I mean, I think that was the question right away. And I'm like, I do not believe that compact is going to be like, sure, Canada, come on in. But if you can get that plurality across Canada, and maybe there's a European operator that's willing to participate, it makes the game more fun, more robust. It makes the experience for people more fun. And, you know, financially, for the new player, it takes $100 and makes it last a heck of a lot longer. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
I know, a long one, but a great one. Jessica Welman is the head of communications / deputy director, and next time we have her on, she'll have
TBD.
She'll have a couple more titles TBD, and just as importantly, longtime friend of Gaming News Canada. Hey, Jess, so glad that you could join us. Come back to the podcast, and
absolutely.
We know you won't be a stranger, and maybe next time we'll get Brianne on here too. We'll get both you and Brianne. We'll have a good conversation.
I love this idea because the two of us together can, as I know, because we're on the phone all the time these days, go on for quite a while once you get it started.
Well, let's plan on doing that in the fall. But once again, thanks so much for your time, and it's great to see you.
Thanks, Steve. It was really fun.
Great. That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. As always, you can find this podcast on the various podcast apps. You can also watch my conversation with Jess on the YouTube channel for Gaming News Canada. Thanks as always to our listeners and viewers for paying attention and supporting this podcast. And we will see everybody again very soon.